A 4'5" powerlifter just beat up a grown man in a boxing ring. That grown man is one half of the Island Boys, the twin duo that once had the internet's full attention for a viral freestyle. Now his name is trending again, and this time rappers won't let it go. Aiden Ross built an entire promotion out of mismatches. Brand risk promotions exists because size differences sell tickets. And on the latest card in Miami, nothing summed that up better than the sight of Kodiyak stepping into the ring across from a man who came up to his chest. Kodiyak took on the 4'5" world's strongest dwarf, Jeremy Smith, in one bout on a night that also featured Vitaly against Larry Wheels, and a handful of other lopsided pairings built entirely around contrast. Aiden Ross put together the card in Miami, with Vitaly and Larry Wheels nearly 50 pounds apart in their own fight, and the same logic applied everywhere else on the lineup. Height, weight, age, none of it mattered as much as the spectacle. The build-up treated the matchup as a novelty. A rapper who blew up off a hot tub freestyle in 2021, facing a man built like a tank who happens to stand 4.5 feet tall. But novelty acts have a habit of turning serious once the bell rings, and this one did exactly that. Smith pressured him from the opening exchanges, and the size gap that was supposed to be a punchline turned into a problem Kodiyak couldn't solve. The pressure built, the rounds tilted, and Smith walked away with the win. By the time the result landed on social media, the reaction wasn't shock. It was recognition, because this is not new territory for Kodiyak. This is a man who has made a habit of losing in front of hundreds of thousands of live viewers. And every single time, the same corner of the internet shows up to pile on. Start with the people who've already had run-ins with him. Charleston White, the 48-year-old influencer who beat Kodiyak in the ring the year before, has never missed a chance to remind people about it. Their fight ended with Kodiyak quitting mid-bout, and White has treated every subsequent Kodiyak headline as a chance to needle him further. When someone as combative and online as White sees his old opponent lose to a man half his size, he doesn't stay quiet. He's built a public persona on exactly this kind of pile-on, and a dwarf beating Kodiyak is the kind of story that writes his commentary for him. Then there's Sauce Walka. Long before the boxing history, Sauce Walka and Kodiyak had already gone face-to-face in a jewelry store, the kind of confrontation that ends up clipped and reposted 1,000 times. Sauce Walka got into a heated fight with Kodiyak from Island Boys at the Johnny Dang Co jewelry store, with the clip going viral after the two argued about who had more money. That beef never really got resolved, it just went quiet. A viral loss to a dwarf is exactly the kind of moment that reopens old wounds like that one. And given the history, Walka watching Kodiyak get outworked by someone a third, his size fits a pattern he's already established. He doesn't respect Kodiyak, and he's said so directly. And then there's the hip-hop media ecosystem that's tracked every single one of these fights. Accounts like Academics TV have turned Kodiyak's boxing losses into recurring content, clipping and captioning every knockdown, every quit, every post-fight interview. When Charleston White beat him, the caption running through that corner of the internet described the old boxer feeling like Unk was feeling like a new man after knocking out the Island Boy. And that's the exact tone these accounts bring back every time Kodiyak loses again. A 4'5" powerlifter finishing what a 48-year-old with one working eye started is the kind of escalation that content built entirely around. That's the shape of it. 3 separate voices, 3 separate grudges, all converging on the same headline. A man whose entire fighting career has been a highlight reel of losses just added the strangest chapter yet, and the people who've already spent a year mocking him aren't about to stop now. But to understand why this particular loss hit different, you have to understand who Kodiyak actually is outside the ring, and how he ended up here in the first place. Because the fighting career isn't a side story. It's become the entire second act of his fame, and it started from a much stranger place than anyone would expect. The Island Boys weren't fighters, they weren't athletes. They were 2 twin brothers from Florida who became almost overnight some of the most talked about and most hated figures on the internet. And the path from viral rap duo to punching bag for internet fighters says a lot about how fame works now, and how fast it can turn against you. Before any of the boxing, before any of the losses, before Jeremy Smith ever stepped into a ring across from him, Kodiyak was famous for something else entirely, and that origin story is where the second half of this needs to start, because it explains exactly why so many people were already primed to enjoy watching him lose. The freestyle that made him famous was inescapable in its moment. It also made him one of the most mocked people on the internet almost instantly. And that hate never really faded. It just found a new outlet once the fighting career started. Understanding that shift is the key to understanding why a loss to a dwarf became a headline instead of a footnote. To understand why the internet reacted the way it did, you need to go back to where this all started, not in a boxing ring, but in a hot tub. I'm an Island Boy by Fly Soulja and Kodiyak refers to a viral freestyle rap video by Florida rappers and twin brothers, Fly Soulja and Kodiyak aka Frankie and Alex Venegas. The video features the two young men with wick dreadlocks and tattoos freestyling in a hot tub in an R&B hip-hop style about being an island boy. It hit the internet in October 2021, and within days it had spread everywhere. A Twitter user posted the video with the caption, "Florida ain't a real place," gaining over 31,600 likes and 16,000 retweets in 6 days. That kind of numbers for a random freestyle clip doesn't happen by accident. It happened because the song was almost impossible to ignore, in the best and worst sense. It went viral in October 2021 as an example of the rappers representing the stereotypical Florida man. The response split almost immediately into mockery and morbid curiosity. Andy Milonakis duetted the video on TikTok, mockingly singing along, and gained over 1.6 million views in 3 days. Podcasts picked it up. YouTube's H3 podcast reacted to the video in an episode, and the clip racked up more views once it hit their Clips channel. By the time the dust settled, the Island Boys weren't just a meme. They were a recurring character in internet culture, the reference point people reached for whenever they wanted to describe something distinctly, almost cartoonishly Florida. But virality like that comes with a cost. The freestyle received significant criticism, with many finding the lyrics hard to understand and the singing bad, though it was also considered catchy by many. And the hate didn't stay online. The Island Boys became consistent subjects of criticism and hate following the video, including having drinks thrown on them at a fight. That detail matters because it tells you something about the temperature around these two from the very beginning. This wasn't a duo that coasted into stardom on goodwill. They were controversial from day one, mocked as much as they were listened to, and that dynamic never really went away. Fast forward from 2021 to now, and the Island Boys' public identity has shifted almost entirely. They're less the guys who made that hot tub song and more the guys who keep losing fights on the internet. That's not an accident either. It's a direct product of where their fame led them once the music cycle cooled off. Once you're a known name with a built-in audience of haters, promoters like Aiden Ross know exactly what to do with you. Brand Risk Promotions doesn't need its fighters to be good. It needs them to be recognizable. And it needs the fights to carry a story, a grudge, a mismatch, a redemption arc, anything that gives viewers a reason to tune in and comment. Kodiak checked every one of those boxes. He was hated enough that people wanted to see him lose, famous enough that a loss would trend, and willing enough to actually get in there and try. That's the engine behind this entire fighting career. It's not really about boxing skill, it's about narrative. Every fight he's taken has had a story attached. The influencer with one eye, the brother he grew up with, the streamer that Dana White bet on. And now, a powerlifter built like a fire plug who happens to be 4.5 feet tall. Each opponent brought its own hook, and each loss added another layer to a reputation that was already leaning toward punchline before any of this fighting even started. There's also a financial layer to this whole picture that explains why he kept signing up for fights he kept losing. While promoting one of Ross's boxing events, Kodiak claimed that he and Fly Soulja were paid $14 million to kiss for OnlyFans. A jaw-dropping figure that, true or wildly exaggerated, tells you exactly how this duo has approached their entire post-fame career. Attention is currency, and Kodiak has treated every controversial headline, every fight, every viral clip as another deposit into that account. Losing to a one-eyed 48-year-old doesn't end the attention economy, it feeds it. Losing to a dwarf half his height does the same thing, just louder. That's the trap he's built for himself, whether intentionally or not. Every fight adds to the pile of reasons people already had to laugh at him. And every loss becomes new ammunition for the same rappers and influencers who've been circling. Since the jewelry store confrontation and the Charleston White fight, The Island Boys' fame started as a joke about how they sounded. It's evolved into a joke about how they fight. And the connecting thread between both eras is the same: an internet that never fully stopped paying attention and never fully stopped mocking what it saw. So by the time Jeremy Smith stepped through the ropes across from him, Kodiyak wasn't walking into a neutral fight. He was walking in with years of accumulated internet resentment behind him. A fighting record that already told its own story, and an audience primed to enjoy watching him struggle. To understand exactly how deep that losing streak runs, and why each fight made the next loss feel almost inevitable, you have to go back through the fights themselves. Because this Dwarf loss wasn't an isolated incident. It was the fourth chapter in a story that had been writing itself for over a year. Every fighter has a record. Kodiyak tells a story of escalating humiliation, each chapter stranger than the last. And every single one of them played out live in front of hundreds of thousands of people. It started in April, in a cage rather than a ring, against a kick streamer named Oblivion. Dana White took $10,000 from Aiden Ross as he watched one of the Island Boys lose his fighting debut, with Ross bringing the MMA cage to Brand Risk Promotions in Miami. Kodiyak and his brother Fly Soldier are two of the most hated social media stars in the world, and over 390,000 fans tuned in to watch one of them get stopped in brutal fashion. The fight itself didn't go the way anyone expected, mostly because Oblivion turned out to actually know how to box from the opening bell. Oblivion's boxing training was evident, and Dana White immediately offered to bet Ross $10,000 that Oblivion would win. Within a minute, Oblivion scored a standing 8 count, and after Kodiyak took a clean combination, including a flush uppercut, the fight was stopped with seconds left in the round. Dana White, the president of the UFC, a man who doesn't need to care about internet boxing at all, walked away $10,000 richer off a bet that took less than a minute to look obvious. That debut ended in chaos outside the ring too. Kodiyak lost in the first round against Oblivion, and the Island Boys were kicked out of the event after a confrontation with the streamer. His brother Fly Soldier was in attendance, and out of frustration, hopped into the ring in an attempt to approach Oblivion together, only to be stopped by security. One fight, one knockout, one ejection from the building. That was the tone the rest of his career would follow. Next came the fight nobody outside the family wanted, but everybody online loved watching brother against brother. Kodiyak stepped in against Flea Soldier himself and lost that one too, dropping a split decision in a bout that turned family drama into pay-per-view content. 2 fights in, 0 wins, and the internet had already started keeping score in the most public way possible. Then came Charleston White. Kodiyak lost yet again. This time to 48-year-old influencer Charleston White, who fought with one eye. White, who has only one functioning eye, couldn't even get sanctioned to fight in Florida, which pushed the whole event to Nashville instead. That's not a small detail. An entire boxing card had to relocate states because a fighter needed cleared to fight, and Kodiyak was still expected to be the safer bet in that matchup. The match began with promise, as Kodiyak appeared to benefit from his youth and prior fight experience. But it quickly devolved into a sluggish exchange with poor technique and minimal movement from both fighters. After hitting the floor in the second round following a slip, both men slowed to a point of barely moving, until eventually White landed the biggest shot of the fight, which stunned his opponent. After the slip and the punch that visibly stunned him, Kodiyak retreated to his corner and told the referee he would not continue. A grown man with one working eye put him down enough that he quit on his stool. The excuses afterward became almost as memorable as the fight itself. Kodiyak later blamed his poor showing on smoking nicotine and marijuana before the fight, admitting flatly, "I gassed out." That kind of honesty, or lack of self-awareness, depending on how you look at it, turned into its own wave of mockery. This wasn't a guy who lost and stayed quiet. He explained exactly how he lost in the most unflattering way possible and handed the internet a punchline on a platter. White, for his part, made the aftermath even more brutal by refusing to let it go quietly. Asked how he felt after the fight, White said he felt like a young N with a new body, adding that fighting is a contact sport he doesn't take lightly, joking that he calls the police on people who throw punches at him. When someone asked what he'd say to people who doubted he'd actually fight, he simply replied, "Sign up for the next fight." That confidence from a nearly 50-year-old man with half his vision is exactly the kind of quote that makes a loss sting harder than the punch itself. By the time that third loss was official, Kodiyak was 0-3 in his fighting career, and the trajectory had become impossible to ignore. Every fight added a new, more embarrassing footnote. Knocked out by a streamer with Dana White cashing in on the side, beaten by his own twin brother, quit against a man who can barely see out of one eye. 3 fights, 3 losses, 3 separate viral moments that all fed the same growing perception that Kodiyak was famous enough to keep getting booked, but never good enough to actually win. That losing streak is exactly what made the Jeremy Smith fight feel less like a shocking twist and more like the next inevitable step. This was a fighter who had already been finished by a trained boxer, outpointed by his own family member, and stopped by a man giving up decades in age and half his eyesight. Adding a name like the world's strongest dwarf to that list wasn't some random curveball from the matchmakers. It fit the pattern perfectly. Another opponent with a built-in story. Another mismatch on paper that Aiden Ross could sell as spectacle. Except this time, the opponent wasn't a novelty booking padded out for laughs. Jeremy Smith walked into that fight with a resume that made him a live threat, not a punchline. To understand exactly how much danger Kodiyak was actually in that night, you have to look at who Jeremy Smith really is outside the 4.5 feet, because underestimating him has cost better-known names than Kodiyak before. Here's the thing people missed when they looked at the height on the fight poster and assumed this was an easy win waiting to happen. Jeremy Smith isn't a novelty fighter. He's a legitimate powerlifter and a genuinely undefeated combat athlete heading into that ring. And his numbers put most full-sized amateur fighters to shame. Jeremy Smith is an American powerlifter and boxer from West Grove, Pennsylvania, widely known as the world's strongest dwarf. Standing 4'5", he's a multi-time world record powerlifter who trains at Westside Barbell, with lifts including a 550-pound raw squat in the 59-kilogram class. That's not a soft record. That's world-class strength relative to body weight, built at one of the most respected powerlifting gyms in the country. His numbers only get more absurd from there. Jeremy Dynamite Smith is a force to be reckoned with in the ring and in the weight room, able to bench press 320 pounds and squat 745 pounds, winning multiple lifting events, along with the title of World's Strongest Dwarf. Think about that for a second. A man standing 4.5 feet tall, squatting nearly 3/4 pounds. That's not a gimmick built for a highlight clip. That's raw, verifiable strength that translates directly into punching power once you put gloves on him. And the boxing career backs that power up. He's fought and won championship belts, and by the most recent count, Jeremy Smith carries a professional record of 6 wins and 0 losses. That's a perfect record heading into the Kodiyak fight. Not a debutant looking for his first win, but a finisher who has already made a habit of ending fights early. His most notable win before this one tells you everything about how dangerous he actually is in there. After winning the Barstool Sports title in Clarksburg, Smith defended his belt and collected a second one with a convincing victory over former WWE superstar Hornswoggle. With the fight stopped in the second round as Smith continually pounded the body of his opponent. His own trainer put it about as plainly as possible afterwards, saying flatly, "We beat him hands down." A former WWE performer, someone with real athletic conditioning, couldn't survive Smith's bodywork for 2 full rounds. None of this happened by accident either. Smith began lifting weights in high school to support his wrestling career, initially focusing on building mass for the 106-pound weight class, then continued powerlifting after high school, driven by a desire to maximize his strength and prove that dwarfism does not limit athletic potential. That's a career built on a specific chip on the shoulder, proving over and over that his height was never going to be the ceiling people assumed it was. He's been candid about exactly why he keeps doing this. Smith has described his overarching goal as motivating others by demonstrating that personal limitations are not excuses for underperformance, saying, "In my mind, it's all just about inspiring people and to give motivation to say if I can put up with this and do this, so can you. There is no excuse." That's not the mindset of a man who signed up for a joke fight against Kodiyak expecting to lose for the bit. That's the mindset of someone who spent his entire life proving people wrong, one lift and one fight at a time. There's also a resilience story buried underneath all the numbers that explains why he fights the way he does. Smith's philosophy centers on resilience forged through adversity, including childhood bullying and the physical challenges of dwarfism in a sport dominated by taller athletes. Every fight he takes is on some level a continuation of a fight he's been having his whole life. People underestimating what he's capable of because of his height. Kodiyak, whether he realized it walking in or not, was stepping into the ring with a man who treats every underestimation as fuel. That's the piece that got lost in all the jokes leading up to fight night. People saw the height difference and assumed the outcome before the bell even rang, the same way people assumed Charleston White's age and eyesight would matter more than they did. But height was never the deciding factor in either of those fights. Skill, conditioning, and heart were. And on paper, even before a single punch landed, Smith had all three in far greater supply than his opponent. So when the pressure built in that ring and Kodiyak started fading the way he had against Charleston White months earlier, it wasn't some freak upset caused by a lucky punch from an unlikely source. It was a trained, undefeated, world record-setting athlete doing exactly what he spent years training to do. Closing distance, applying pressure, and breaking down an opponent who had already shown, fight after fight, that he doesn't have the gas tank or the technique to hold up once things get uncomfortable. That combination, an underestimated, genuinely elite opponent against a fighter with a well-documented history of folding under pressure, is exactly why this loss hit differently than the ones before it. It wasn't just another name added to Kodiyak's record of losses. It was the moment the joke and the reality of who Jeremy Smith actually is collided head-on, live in front of an audience that had shown up expecting comedy and got a legitimate finish instead. And once that finish happened, the reaction across hip-hop's online spaces didn't take long to catch fire, because this wasn't just another loss to file away. It was the loss that confirmed everything the rappers and influencers already circling Kodiyak had been saying for over a year. By the time the final bell rang, the reaction was already forming before the ring announcer even finished reading the scorecards. This is what happens every single time Kodiyak loses. And by now, it's basically a script the internet knows by heart. Charleston White has never needed much of an excuse to talk about Kodiyak, and a loss to a dwarf is about as good an excuse as it gets. White built an entire post-fight media cycle out of beating him once already, riding the win from event to event, interview to interview. A man who told the world he'd rather call the police than take a punch, then backed it up by beating Kodiyak anyway, isn't going to stay silent. While someone half his opponent's size finishes the job even more decisively. The pattern with White has always been the same. Find the opening, take the shot, ride the clip. This gave him another one. Saucewalka's history runs even deeper, and it's rooted in something that had nothing to do with boxing at all. Their confrontation started over money and clout in a jewelry store, with Waka insisting, "I'm a millionaire." "You're not a millionaire, bro?" While Kodiyak fired back that he was more known. That argument never really got settled. It just moved to Instagram comment sections where the two kept sniping at each other long after the cameras stopped rolling. A dwarf finishing what Charleston White started is exactly the kind of moment that reopens an unresolved beef like that. Especially for someone who already made it clear publicly that he doesn't respect Kodiyak's status, his money, or his toughness. Then there's the machine that turns every one of these fights into content in the first place. Accounts and pages built around hip-hop news, the same ones that clipped Charleston White walking away like a new man after his win. Don't slow down for a loss this absurd. If a 48-year-old man with one working eye became a viral moment for beating Kodiyak, a world record powerlifter standing 4.5 feet tall finishing the job is an even easier sell. These are the same corners of the internet that turned an Island Boys freestyle into a meme empire back in 2021. They know exactly how to turn a loss like this into another week of content, and they've never needed much encouragement. There's a bigger picture underneath all the individual reactions too, and it's the same one that's followed Kodiyak since his boxing career started. The betting angle. Dana White walked away from the Oblivion fight $10,000 richer, treating an internet boxing match seriously enough to put real money behind the obvious outcome. That's the dynamic that's followed every one of these fights since. people with real money and real credibility in combat sports. Watching Kodiyak step into these matchups and immediately recognizing how it's going to end. When the president of the UFC is willing to bet against you in a novelty fight, that tells you something about how the people who actually understand fighting see your chances. Jeremy Smith walking in with a perfect professional record and a background of legitimate finishes against trained opponents. Put him in exactly that same territory. The kind of opponent that anyone paying close attention would have bet against Kodiyak to beat. What makes this particular chapter land harder than the others is the layer of legitimate athletic credibility Smith brought into the ring that none of the previous opponents really had in the same way. Oblivion was a trained streamer. Fly Soldier was family, working with the same limited experience as his brother. Charleston White was a 48-year-old with half his vision. Jeremy Smith is a 6-time undefeated professional fighter who has already finished a former WWE performer and set world records in a nationally recognized powerlifting gym. Losing to him isn't a story about bad luck or a lucky punch. It's a story about a fighter who has now lost to genuinely elite competition alongside everyone else on his record. That's the shape the mockery has taken every time, and there's no reason to think this round is any different. The rappers circling Kodiyak right now aren't reacting out of nowhere. They're reacting because this is now a pattern with a body count. Oblivion, his own brother, Charleston White, and now a world record powerlifter. And every single loss has fed the same online ecosystem that turned his music career into a meme in the first place. Charleston White gets another clip to point to. Sauce Walker gets another reason to bring up the jewelry store. The hip-hop pages get another finish to caption. And Kodiyak gets another entry in a fighting resume that's turned from a redemption story into something closer to a running joke that keeps writing its own punchlines. Where this goes from here is genuinely uncertain. Nothing about this pattern suggests he's stepping away from the ring. Every loss so far has been followed by another booking, another opponent with a built-in story, another chance for Aiden Ross to sell a mismatch as can't-miss TV. Whether Kodiyak fights again is almost beside the point at this stage. The bigger question is who's left to book him against that hasn't already been established as either a family member, a trained fighter, an aging influencer, or now a world record-holding powerlifter who happens to stand 4.5 feet tall. Every name on that list found the same result, and the rappers piling on this week are simply the latest to say out loud what the record has been showing for over a year. And the rappers piling on this week are simply the latest to say out loud what the record has been showing for over a year.